door, then opened the door, and the lady just barged in with her accomplice and knew that they were up to no good.
We all know that unsettling feeling of being home alone and hearing a strange noise or seeing something unusual. It's a scary feeling, a vulnerable one, and we are going to make that feeling even worse with these terrifying experiences. If you're home alone, well, sorry. Let's get right into it. Starting off today, we have this Reddit post that comes from the user Mad Domestic Scientist, and they wrote, quote, "Woke up one night to the realization someone standing over my bed. I somehow reacted instantly and grabbed my night table one-handed and hit him with it, and kept hitting him with it. I wasn't even fully awake yet. The commotion caused my neighbor to call 911. Turned out it was our landlord and he'd been doing it for a while. I messed him and myself up pretty good. It's funny what adrenaline does to you. I could barely pick that table up one-handed if I tried, it's so heavy. I'd been facing the table, laying half on my side, half on my stomach, and swung it backhanded like a tennis racket and tore all the muscles in my arm, chest, and the muscles that attach those to the sternum. He, on the other hand, wound up with a cracked skull, broken eye socket, broken nose, and a few less teeth. It happened so fast it didn't even occur to me to be scared until it was all said and done. I was calm right up until mid-interview with a cop when all of a sudden the adrenaline left and shock set in. My legs gave out and I started to shake so hard my teeth were chattering." This is an absolutely terrifying story, and thankfully in the replies the people asked the question we're all likely thinking. User I Do the Hokey Pokey asked, "Why was your landlord coming into your place? Sounds like he got what he had coming to him." To which the Mad Domestic Scientist replied and said, quote, "He admitted to doing it for a long time. This was one of those big old houses near a college that had been split into apartments, and he tried to rent exclusively to girls. He just liked to stare at sleeping women, I guess. I just happened to be the one to catch him. Nasty. I hate it." Next up, this story comes from a Reddit user who has since deleted their account, and they wrote, quote, "It was a late summer's night. My father was away for the night, so he left me alone in our countryside house with the computer and some snacks. I sat there with headphones on, watching the TV series Forensic Files, when I felt slight vibrations in the floor. I just have to pause here to say that if you have ever watched Forensic Files alone before, you know this feeling exactly. It is so specific, but there is nothing like it. That truly is one of the most unsettling shows to watch while alone, let alone with what happens next in this story." They continued on to say, quote, "Thinking it was my father, I removed the headphones and sat quietly. After a few seconds, I got up to investigate, and in our doorway was a woman. She was in her 30s. She looked at me like she wasn't expecting anyone and said, 'Is your father here?' And I said he wasn't, and then she left. I didn't watch any more Forensic Files that night." Yeah, definitely wouldn't put on Forensic Files again either. I probably actually wouldn't have put anything else on and just sat there being terrified at every little sound I heard for the next few hours until my dad got home. Next up, we have this story that comes from the user TealBlue3, and they wrote about an experience when they were left babysitting their younger sibling while their parents participated in a scavenger hunt organized by the father's fire department. As they were home alone, living on a secluded 10-acre property, they noticed a minivan speeding down their driveway late at night. The vehicle abruptly stopped at their home, and about 7 individuals with flashlights emerged, dispersing and encircling the house. Terrified, the person quickly hid their younger brother in the pantry, I mean where else do they really go, instructing him to stay silent and hidden. With no cell phones available, they had to use the kitchen landline, extending its cord to maintain cover while trying to call the neighbor for help. They explained that the neighbors would be able to be over much quicker than first responders could due to how far out they were from the city. While this was all happening, the mysterious group is still outside and they are urgently searching around the property. The person felt an agonizing wait until their neighbor's car finally arrived, which scared off the intruders, who hastily regrouped and then fled. Their neighbor pursued them briefly and returned with a license plate number just moments before the parents came back, somewhat inebriated from their evening. It was later revealed that the family's home had been unknowingly included in this scavenger hunt, with the task involving counting trees in their backyard. Yeah, the intruders were actually participants from the fire department, mistaken for a threat due to the lack of communication. You would think that this would have been on someone's list to just let everyone know, but of course not. In the end, I'm glad it had a happy ending, but I could definitely see why the Reddit user user was annoyed about the whole situation. Absolutely terrifying. Next up, we have a short but nonetheless terrifying story, and this is one that comes from the Reddit user Scions in a Police Box. They wrote, quote, "I was in the shower when I heard the door to my apartment being unlocked. My husband wasn't due back for several hours. Turns out it was the skeevy building manager snooping around people's apartments when he thought they were not home. I reported him to the company that owned the building, but nothing ever came of it. We moved out shortly after." An unsettling story with an unsettling end. How creepy. There are a lot of creepy and spooky stories on this list, but this one definitely takes the cake for being one of the most fascinating. A perspective that I really just didn't know I would hear, and it comes from a Reddit user called HighBrook6. They wrote about being homesick with a cold while the rest of their family went to early church services. They continue on, quote, "Then I heard the sound of a lot of airplanes flying overhead, followed by numerous explosive sounds. Then I heard people in the neighborhood outdoors screaming and crying, and adults yelling for their kids. I looked out the window and saw people in our neighborhood running about and a whole lot of car engines starting up and leaving the area. I was confused and scared as I had no idea what was happening. Then my next door neighbor came into the house and asked me where everyone was, and I told him they all left except I was home alone. So he wrapped me in a blanket, picked me up, and took me to his car, which was filled with his family and some belongings. I was driven to the mountainous areas of Honolulu, and along the way I saw people scurrying around in panic, women crying, and I was just totally scared and confused. It was December 7th, 1941, and Japanese planes were bombing Pearl Harbor and other of the many military installations in Honolulu. Later, I was reunited with my family, who profusely thanked our neighbor for looking after me, and everyone sat down to talk about what happened that day, which was the start of World War II for Hawaii and the US. Thankfully, after many curious replies, the poster added an edit to include a little bit more to the story. They wrote, quote, "Edit. Our lives were completely altered in the following days. A total blackout of the city was put in place, which meant that no lights of any kind were allowed to be shown after dark. No cars were allowed to drive at night. All businesses were closed after dark. No one was allowed outdoors after dark. There were even neighborhood wardens who checked up on all the homes to assure that they followed the total darkness, and violators were arrested and fined. We coped by painting all our windows black besides having them draped over. This allowed us to read books or play board games under candlelight while we fashioned blankets to totally cover us so as to not allow leakage of light. Fun times. I remember when the war was near its end and the street lamps in Honolulu were turned on again. People rushed to the streets to glory in seeing Honolulu at night again." This story comes from a Reddit user called The Haunted Butterfly, and they wrote about one night when their parents were gone for a while and they stayed up late past midnight on their computer waiting for their parents to get home. They wrote, quote, "Like most people, I had been told a million times not to talk to strangers on the internet, but about half my friends list on MSN were people I had never met before, so I was just chatting with a bunch of them. Out of nowhere, one of my online friends had told me exactly what I had been doing the past hour or two, like what I was eating, drinking, playing with, when I had gotten up last, things I hadn't mentioned in the chat. I instantly got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. My desktop was set up in front of a big window, so as far as I knew, this person I had been talking to, that was supposed to live in a different country than me, had found my address and had been watching me through the window. Turns out he had somehow hacked into my webcam. I always left it plugged in even though I had been warned not to when I wasn't using it, and he had been frequently watching me through it whenever he wanted. It's been 10 years and I still have all the cameras on my devices covered in thick duct tape. Well, I think this story effectively scared me enough to now cover all my webcams around me forever, so thank you, Haunted Butterfly, I'm terrified." This next story comes from the user Oprah Lover, which, okay, and is a little different because instead of a Home Alone story, it's a Hostel alone story, which, depending on who you ask, might be even more terrifying. They wrote, quote, "When I went to Philadelphia once, I stayed in a private room in a hostel alone. I came home from a night at like some frat party, and I'd walked into the room, threw my coat on the bed, left the lights off, walked into the bathroom, came back, noticed something by the windows in the corner. A homeless man had gotten into the room by apparently just walking into the front door behind me, waited until I got to my room and slid something in the door latch so it wouldn't close 100%. I threw an ashtray at his head and ran out of the room. The police apparently told me that this wasn't the first time that he's done this, and also he had a slight disorder and was prone to eating stray cats. Haven't been to Philly since." I appreciate this level of storytelling. There's Absolutely no fluff, it's just straight to the point, getting to the facts. This is another Reddit story from a user who has since deleted their account, and it all starts off with them being home alone and playing video games when someone suddenly kicked in their front door. They continue on, quote, "I ran to look and saw two men entering. They didn't see me, so I slowly and as quietly as possible went back to my room. I turned off the TV and I hid under my bed while they tore my house apart. One of them came in my room and actually stole the Sega Genesis I was playing. I was pretty sure I was going to be found at this point as I was breathing heavy out of fear. The same person then went to my brother's room and killed his bird by smashing the cage because it wouldn't shut up. They stayed in the house for a while, smashing stuff looking for God knows what, even had a beer from the fridge while sitting on our couch. Eventually they left, but I stayed under the bed till my dad came home." An absolutely frightening story, and honestly this one didn't have as many upvotes as a lot of the others, which I was shocked about. This story is definitely one that stuck out to me. A terrifying experience, no thank you. This post is from a deleted Reddit account, and the person recounting the story lived in a relatively small and typically safe Midwestern town known for its low crime rates. During this time, they lived with their boyfriend who worked night shifts, leaving them alone at home with their young son on most weekdays. Their tranquility was suddenly interrupted when the boyfriend befriended a new coworker, a middle-aged man who had recently moved to town and appeared to be facing hard times. Being the considerate person he was, the boyfriend started offering him rides to and from work, and the newcomer, who seemed amiable and even doted on their baby, quickly became a regular part of their lives. However, the situation took a very dark turn when the boyfriend discovered his new friend's troubling past. One day the coworker revealed his story with substance abuse and confided about his criminal history, including a lengthy prison sentence for a very serious violent offense. Following this revelation, the boyfriend chose to distance himself from the man. They write, quote, "Well, one summer night when my boyfriend was at work, I was sitting in the living room doing some sort of craft after I put our son to sleep upstairs. The front door opened directly into the living room. It was a single-family tiny house on the outskirts of town. My cat started going nuts, his fur standing up and his tail bushy and huge. He was hissing and staring at the front door, and when I looked to see what he was freaking out about, my heart dropped. The prison dude was standing outside my front door, staring inside. I didn't realize it was him until he opened the door. It's a small town, not out of the ordinary to leave the door unlocked, and he came inside the house. He was out of his mind, very jittery and erratic. I stood up and I said, 'Hi, can I help you?' because I didn't know what else the say. My heart was beating so fast and my mind was going a mile a minute, recognizing that my infant was sleeping upstairs and my phone was charging up there too. He said, 'Is the kid home?' meaning my boyfriend. I said, 'Yes, he's sleeping with the baby upstairs, and is there something I could help him with?' As soon as I said he was home, his demeanor changed and he became more nervous, saying, 'Oh, I'm sorry, I thought he'd be at work.' He left quickly after that, saying that he'd text him later. As soon as he left, I locked all of the doors, grabbed my phone and my son, and called my boyfriend to tell him to come home. We moved shortly after that because I just couldn't sleep well at all when I was alone. This is the scariest part. A few weeks later, the guy got busted breaking into someone's house, essaying, kidnapping, and threatening the wife of someone that owed him money. He also got caught setting up a hit on somebody with an undercover cop. He will be in prison forever. So if I wouldn't have said that my boyfriend was sleeping upstairs, it could have been me. Alright, and finally today this story comes from the user ChubbyMommy2020 and they wrote, quote, "I was taking a nap in my apartment under blankets in my bed when I heard the door open. Thinking it was my husband, I ignored it, but about 5 minutes later I heard several female voices. I'm thinking I'm dreaming again, so I ignored it. The voices got louder and suddenly my bedroom door opened. I freaked out and bolted upright in bed. 3 women were in my apartment, 2 young, 1 older. I shrieked, they ran out of my apartment. It turned out that the management company showed the wrong apartment available for rent that day. I got an apology and a bouquet of flowers." Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye!